Why, hello there. So tonight I am definitely going to be making something super delicious. I'm going to make chicken tostadas. And a tostada, generally, is a corn tortilla, circular corn tortilla that's been deep fried so that it's crispy, but it's flat so that it makes a nice surface for piling stuff on top. In this case, I'm going to make some of my own refried beans, frijoles refritos. I'm also going to be making shredded chicken with cilantro and onion, and I'm going to be topping the chicken and the beans with different vegetables and a chile sauce that I'm going to make myself. So most of the ingredients I'll be using you see in front of you. Obviously, I've got a ton of chiles, both sweet and spicy. They're basically Turkish red peppers. They have a slightly different flavor to them, an interesting flavor in comparison to, say, a red bell pepper. I have some spicy, smaller red chiles. I'm going to be roasting all of these. I've got onions, I've got cilantro, I've got tomato, I've got garlic and some spices back here, cumin, obviously, some butter, and then I've got my beans here, and I'm actually going to use two types of beans today. Borlotti beans, which they're kind of comparable to pinto beans, and I'm actually going to be mixing those with black beans because I like the flavor of these two types of beans. So first things first, I'm going to rinse my beans and drain those and get those ready for cooking. I'm going to peel and dice all of my onions, and I'm going to turn my oven on to a high temperature convection so that I can roast all of these chiles. We'll see you in a bit. So I've prepared all of the peppers for the sauce to be roasted. As you can see, I choose to actually cut mine out and clean all of the seeds and veins out beforehand. Not exactly a popular decision, nor one that you'll find in most recipes, but honestly, it's going to make my life easier. So I'm going to pop these into my convection broiler at about 225, 250 degrees, and then I'm basically just going to let them roast until I can smell them in my house, and then I know they're ready to come out. In the meantime, I have minced garlic ready, as well as half of a diced white onion, because I'm going to use these when frying my beans for the first time. So I've got a pan preheating, and we'll transition over to there in just a second. So here we are at our pan that I'm going to use for my beans. Now, traditionally, the reason that they're called refried beans is because they are cooked or fried twice. In the case of using canned beans, though, they've already been cooked the one time. So all I'm really doing is heating the beans up and getting them ready to be mashed or smashed up or whatever one more time. I do like to add a couple of extra flavors when it comes to just plain old beans going into my pan. So I'll throw in some olive oil, and I'm going to be sauteing probably about 2 cloves of garlic and that half of an onion you just saw. So it's looking like our oil is just about hot enough. I'm going to go ahead and throw in our onions and our garlic first. All right, these have been sweat a little bit. You can tell that the onion is not quite translucent yet, but it's getting there. I think it's time to add our rinsed and drained beans right here. Now, I am not a big fan of adding any other seasoning to my refried beans, just some garlic and some onions. And I'm basically just going to let these heat on up until they're ready to be mashed. So while our beans cook, we're going to rejoin our peppers, which I can smell all over my kitchen, which means they're probably finished. So let's check the oven and see. These are looking pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put all of these peppers into this bowl, and I'm going to cover the peppers in boiling water and let them sit for at least 30 minutes. Our beans are looking pretty much the right temperature and amount of cookedness. The onions are translucent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer these into, I suppose you could call it the dish that I'm going to use to mash them. But in this case, I'm actually going to blend them, which is exactly why I'm going to put all the beans into this thing. And if you've ever seen one of these, it's a container for an immersion blender. So we are going to blend the beans. As you can see, slow and steady wins the race. Now, some of you might be wondering, Dani, why in the world are you blending beans instead of just mashing them up? And the reason I'm doing it is because I don't want chunks of onion or garlic in my refried beans. I want it to be all one excellent paste. And so we begin. I'm going to begin on a rather low setting because I don't want to like have beans spring up out of my face, but you can see this is fairly full. So this is going to take me a little bit of time. I just have to be patient. Now at some point you're going to notice that this is really, really thick, and that's actually absolutely fine, but we don't actually want to keep it that thick, so we're going to add some butter to our mixture. Butter is going to add fat to our beans, which will make them that much more delicious, and it's going to give us a consistency that we can use very well in our tostada. I recommend putting the butter underneath your blade. And luckily our beans are so warm it's going to melt right in there. Now, if you've got your beans to the right consistency, we're going to go ahead and empty those into a small saucepan so that we can see what our mixture has turned out like. And there we have some refried beans. Make sure that you give them a try. If you feel that they need some seasoning, please obviously add that. As a matter of fact, I tried these just a moment ago, and I think I'm going to add a little bit of salt and just a touch more butter. And then I can actually just set these aside because they are finished cooking. The consistency we're looking for is not too thick. We want it to be nice and spreadable though for our tostadas. And so we're at the point now where our chiles are basically cooled off. They're sitting in their water. I have another half of an onion diced as well as my garlic sitting out. I'm going to make my chili sauce in just one moment. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and make my masa for my tortillas because I'm going to hand make my corn tortillas today. I have a video on how to actually make corn tortillas from fresh masa harina, so I'm not going to worry about that now. But you'll at least get to see how it's done. And now that needs to sit for about 10 to 15 minutes. We can also preheat our comal or our skillet to cook these. I'll be getting my tortilla press out, all that stuff. But I think first we're going to go for the chili sauce. So here we are with our cooled chiles. What we do need to make sure of is that there aren't too many seeds or veins that are left in the chiles, and also we want to try and take off this skin. This can make our sauce bitter. Because these have been soaking in some nice water, it should come off pretty easily. And if you don't get every single piece of skin, not a big deal. But just make sure that you're keeping that water, because we're going to cook with it, and that you carefully peel the skin so that you don't take lots of pepper with it. Alright, chiles are skinless, and now we can get started cooking our sauce. As you can see here, we have a small, well, a medium-sized soup pan here that has some oil preheated in it. We're going to go ahead and carefully add our onions and probably 3 or 4 cloves of garlic. Another thing that I'm preparing right now, not that it takes a lot of preparing, is I've got a couple of chicken bouillon cubes, and I've also got some water standing by because we may need some extra water besides the water that our chiles have soaked in. So just 1 or 2 minutes later, we have about half-cooked onions. They're semi-translucent, but our garlic is looking really nice. Next thing I'm going to do is crumble in both of my bouillon cubes. This is actually quite a bit of bouillon for the amount of liquid, but I like a nice, strong bouillon flavor. I've also got my paprika, some oregano, some ground black pepper all standing by. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my chiles and their water, and I'm adding them whole. I'm not chopping them or anything, because trust me, we're going to get this smooth later on. We'll give this a stir. I'm going to add what's probably a teaspoon or 2 of oregano, maybe half a tablespoon. I'm also going to add some black pepper, but not too terribly much, maybe like half a teaspoon. And I'm going to add a lot of cumin, but then again, I love cumin. I might add a tablespoon or 2 of cumin. There we go. We're going to get this all stirred in, and then, so I am going to add maybe a cup of liquid for now, and I'm going to need to bring this to a slow boil. The other thing I managed to dig out of my cupboard that I didn't even know I had was some canned serrano chiles, which is awesome because these things are really nice and spicy. And from peeling those red peppers from before, I didn't feel a lot of tingling on my hands, so I don't think I got very spicy peppers. So I threw in a couple of serrano chiles because that's going to give this some nice spice. And I'm just going to let this sit until I see some bubbles. Even though we're not quite bubbling yet, the amount of steam coming off of this tells me I've probably cooked this long enough. So what I've already done just before this is I tasted the broth. It's doing really, really well. I'm going to turn this burner off, and I just want this to sit for a while because I am going to need to blend this, but I want to do it safely so I don't want hot liquid splashing up in my face. So we're just going to let this sit on a nice cool burner and continue cooking our tortillas. And we're back. You can see that this is still steaming, but because I've got to get a little bit of a move on with my chicken, I'm going to go ahead and blend my chili sauce now. So you also might notice that this pot looks a little bit smaller. That was on purpose. I actually want the liquid to be as deep as possible because instead of putting this into a big blender, I'm going to be using my stand blender, my immersion blender one more time. Now this is tricky though. Unlike the beans, which are nice and thick, this is really, really watery, really liquidy. So if the liquid doesn't stay above these holes right here, I'm going to spray burning hot liquid onto myself. So I need to be very careful. I'm going to start on my low setting, and I'm just going to pulse this and move it around until I don't see any more chunks. I think I've got almost all the chunks out of this, but I'm going to double check with a spoon. You'll notice I only used short bursts, and I never tilted the blender too far sideways because it's really easy if you get caught against the corner of a pan or something to spray yourself with hot liquid. These are a little bit temperamental. So just when you're using an immersion blender, always be really nice and gentle. So you can see here, this is very much the consistency of soup. I will probably thicken this a little bit with maybe cornstarch slurry, which means cornstarch mixed with water. We're also going to give it a taste. It tastes perfect though. So I'll probably put this back on the stove, thicken it just a little bit, and while I do that, I am also preheating a pan of oil, just enough oil to cover the bottom, because I'm going to make my crispy tortillas. As promised, I do want to thicken this just a little bit. That is probably about 3 tablespoons of cornstarch to maybe a tablespoon or 2 of water, just enough to get it to be liquid. And constantly whisking, I'm just going to drizzle this in. And that means I'm going to get that thickening power without having lumps in my sauce. And I don't want to add too much of this because I don't want to change the flavor or the color of my sauce too much. Now I am going to need to bring this to a boil, otherwise I won't see that thickening happen. And then in the meantime, I can prepare my chicken as well. The shredded chicken that I'm going to use for these tostadas is just so incredibly simple to make that it is ridiculous. And just these 2 chicken breasts would actually probably be enough to feed about 4 people. Now when we make shredded chicken, we're going to actually boil the chicken first. So I'm going to cut it into pieces that are, I don't know, an inch or so across, like inch squares, and then plop them into a pan, like so. Now, easy peasy, I'm going to cover the chicken in water, and then the only things I'm going to put into the water is just a bit of coarse ground black pepper. I probably am using about a teaspoon, not too terribly much, and another 2 or 3 cloves of minced garlic. And then I'm going to put this onto the stove to boil. As soon as it boils, I'm going to cover it, reduce the heat, and continue to boil it for about 30 to 45 minutes. So now you can kind of see all the way across my stove. I've just placed the chicken here, and I'm going to turn that burner up so that it starts to boil. We can see here that this sauce has thickened really nicely, and it is perfect. So I've actually turned down the temperature almost to nothing. In fact, I could turn this off because it's going to stay nice and warm for quite some time without burning. And also, my oil is preheated. So as soon as I get a cookie sheet covered in some paper towels, I can start frying my tortillas. And now for the most harrowing part of our journey, we're going to fry. And frying tortillas can be a little bit tricky. I will tell you why. When we fry a tortilla, they tend to A, puff up, which we don't really want them to do because we're going to need them to be flat to pile things on top of them. B, they tend to spit oil everywhere. And C, because of the strange shape a tortilla like sort of twists itself into when you fry it, it can tend to splatter oil and bubble up in fun and strange ways. So the oil, though, has to be really nice and hot because we're going for an even darker brown than you might expect. We don't want light golden because if you want a crispy tortilla and one that's not soggy in the middle, you've really got to fry it. So it's always a little bit of an adventure frying a tortilla. We're going to do our best, though. I know the oil is nice and hot because I can actually see it smoking a little bit. So I'm just going to very gently place my tortilla into that oil, and we're going to see how she goes, because some tortillas start poofing up air bubbles and you've got to poke them right away, and some of them don't. This one doesn't seem to be doing that. So I might, oh, there it goes. See, you can see that it has poofed up a little air pocket. And we need to continuously flip these. So if I see the air pocket becoming a problem, like I won't have a flat surface, I'll poke it or find a way to stab it with a knife or something to get that air pocket out. And you have to do that before it gets crispy, otherwise it just doesn't work. But this one seems to be cooperating rather nicely. Now you can see this second one is already developing big air pockets. We've got to fix that problem. What I would normally do is literally pinch so that that air can get out, so the oil can get in and get rid of those air pockets for me. But you'll notice the tortilla is like bouncing up and down. That's because I created those air pockets. So that's what I mean. These things are really temperamental. Now I'd say it's only been about 1 minute, but this tortilla is looking quite finished. So we can go ahead and lift him out and place him over on our prepared cookie sheet to drain. And then we just keep this going until it's all finished. Our chicken is now cooked for approximately 40 minutes. And we are going to empty it into a colander. Carefully, it's hot. And then we just need to let it sit here for probably another 15 minutes or so to cool as much as possible, because I actually shred my chicken directly with my hands, but I certainly don't want to put my hands into burning hot chicken because I will hurt myself. It is nearly time for us to put together our tostadas. The very last thing that we need to do is shred our chicken. Now, there is like a super easy way to do this where you take a hand mixer and you just stick it in there with the beaters and blah, 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 and then it does all the chicken. But honestly, this just doesn't take that long. So as long as the chicken is cool enough, you can just do it with your hands. What I tend to do is take probably 4 or 5 blocks of the chicken and I just start to squeeze it together. That's all you have to do, probably 4 or 5 times. And then I roll it apart with my fingers. Another nice thing is that if somebody ends up leaving a chicken bone in what was supposed to be your boneless chicken that you bought from the store, you'll find it with your hands, but you won't find it with your mixer. All right, so now we have some lovely shredded chicken. The last thing we need to do is add the cilantro and onions to this mixture. We're going to add, I'd say, about 1/4 of an onion. And then, I mean, I love cilantro, so I'm just going to pile that on in there. That's about half the cilantro that I had cut up originally. And then we're just going to toss that together. And there's our finished chicken, which means that after I wash my hands, we can put our tostadas together. It is most certainly time to make some tostadas. As you can see, I have literally everything I need in front of me. Over to my left, I've got my refried beans. I've also got the chicken I just finished, as well as my chile sauce. And then I've got my toppings, my lettuce, my cilantro, my onion, my tomato, and my substitute for cotija cheese, which is feta in this case. I'm in Belgium, what am I gonna do? I like to begin with the refried beans. They're kind of like the glue on my tortilla. So we'll just take a nice generous scoopy and spread that around. Then we move on to some chicken. And now the rest is entirely up to you. You put it on in any order that you like. I am gonna go next with my shredded lettuce, and then my onion, my tomato, my chile sauce, and then finally my cheese and my cilantro. And there we are, chicken tostada. Enjoy.